America is a country chock full of different cultures and people with their own legends and myths of monsters. But that doesn't mean there aren't monsters that are uniquely American. Today, we're going to talk about melon heads, their multiple origins, and their confusing past. Melon heads are deformed, feral humans who supposedly suffer from hydrocephalus, giving them their distinctive appearance. Along with their head, they have strange deformed limbs, razor-sharp teeth, and glowing red eyes. And this is where melon heads get complicated. I found 4 different stories about where they come from, and I'm sure there are even more local legends where they are seen. And depending on who you talk to, melon heads might just watch you from the woods, or might try and attack you. From what I found, they call Connecticut, Ohio, and Michigan home. But let's get into their origins and see if they can help us understand what's going on with the melon heads. The first story, from Connecticut, goes like this. In the early 1700s, when America was still a British colony, an entire family was banished into the woods after being accused of practicing witchcraft. Over time, this disturbed family began inbreeding, and over the decades, and following centuries, the family became even more disturbed and riddled with deformities from inbreeding. These deformities also caused their intelligence to become more animal-like and less human, and with the loss of their humanity, the melon heads began eating whatever they could get their hands on, including people. I will admit that this is a pretty good campfire story, but it's not really anything special. The next 3 stories are something else entirely, however. The second legend, also from Connecticut, starts with an unknown mental institution in the 1960s, with mostly sane patients, with a few exceptions. One night, whether it was accidental or sabotage on one of the patients, the building caught fire. During the fire, some of the more deranged patients escaped and hid in the woods. After the fire had stopped, those who had hid and escaped were assumed dead, so no one went looking for them. The old mental institution was ravaged by the fire and abandoned. The more deranged patients who had escaped began eating the dead after everyone had left. This habit somehow made their heads swell and gave them a taste for human flesh. The tale of the melon heads coming from a mental institution or hospitals is pretty commonplace. Still, the story is wild, a bunch of people escaping into the woods, surviving by eating people and only people. For the next story, we travel over to Michigan, with a bit of a sadder story. The third story begins in Holland, Michigan, specifically the Felt Mansion. The Felt Mansion was constructed in 1928 by a man named Dorr Felt for his wife to use as a summer home. The mansion traded hands for a while, being a school, a chapel, a police post, and eventually a prison. This story says that at some point the mansion acted as a makeshift hospital used to treat kids with hydrocephalus. However, there is no concrete proof of this. Whether it was a hospital or not, the story says that the people running the hospital were forced to close it down. Not knowing what to do with the children they were treating, they abandoned them in the woods, where the kids turned feral. It is said that they now inhabit underground tunnels underneath the mansion. This one is just sad, imagining a bunch of kids who were probably already abandoned because of their deformity being abandoned again after being told they could be helped. It's just a little heartbreaking. This next story is a little confusing, as it has 2 different halves with the same beginning. The tale of Dr. Crow in Kirtland, Ohio is the most popular version of the Melonhead's creation. The story begins shortly after World War II. The U.S. government was sending children suffering from hydrocephalus to Dr. Crow's home in the woods. He was helping the kids not only with their disease, but also coming to terms with their altered appearance, living free from judgment in the woods. Dr. Crow researched tirelessly for a cure, but he died of natural causes before he could finish it. The children, not sure what to do after the doctor's death, decided to stay in the area, and if you manage to find your way to the doctor's former home, you may encounter a melonhead. Unlike the other tales of melonheads, these ones will just watch you from a distance instead of attacking you. Dr. Crow might not have been the noble doctor that the last story made him out to be. There's another story involving him, a much more disturbing one. The story's beginning is similar, with the U.S. government sending kids to Dr. Crow's house. Once the children arrived at Dr. Crow's house, he would begin experimenting on them, torturing them in the process. He morphed and molded the kids in disturbing ways, their heads getting even larger and their bodies shriveling up. One day, the children had enough, and they revolted, killing Dr. Crow. They burned down the house they lived in and escaped into the woods. The children, now warped beyond their initial deformities into something monstrous, had begun to hate anything that didn't look like them, and would attack normal people on sight. As they got older, the melonheads began to breed amongst themselves, only worsening their deformities. They began to steal livestock in the area, and when they were really desperate, they'd even steal pets and eat them. and on very rare occasions, someone might go missing in the woods, and they will never be found as there's nothing left to find. This story is kind of comically evil, in my opinion, like, oh yes, I'll take these deformed, abandoned children and just experiment on them for no fucking reason. It's like a setup for a really shitty dark humor joke, but that's just me. I think melon heads make even less sense now, if that's even possible, but who knows. Maybe if we go over some of the first-hand encounters, we'll get a better idea. So the Blue Granada is the first encounter we'll go over, and it's pretty interesting to say the least. Back in the 1980s, a group of high school girls in Ohio decided to drive around after a Friday night football game. They piled into a Blue Granada and ended up on the edge of town by the woods. One of them dared the rest to go looking for the melonheads. They parked the car, leaving the headlights on, and ventured into the woods. They started walking through the brush. After a few minutes of messing around, they heard the car door slam. The car sped towards them, almost hitting one of them and heading deep into the woods. As the car took off, they briefly saw strange figures inside. The size of children, they had large heads, rags for clothes, and a red glow in their eyes. Some say the melonheads still drive around in that Blue Granada. This story is obviously a joke, it's not meant to be taken seriously. I just wanted to include it because I thought it was pretty funny just imagining little melonheads driving around in a car. So the next few encounters are actually kind of believable and come from the Geauga County Maple Leaf. That's Geauga. I hope I'm saying that right, Geauga. And I've just lifted these encounters straight from the website, so there will be a link in the description if you want to, check them out. It was a pretty good article. It's what I used for majority of this, but let's get into this first encounter here. I used to live by the woods on Windsor Road near the Ludgren barn. When I was 10 years old, I had a brief encounter with a melonhead, blogger Jeff B. wrote in 2009. It was an early autumn night, around 10 p.m., when I heard my dog bark, and I ran outside to see what was going on. When I went outside to see what the commotion was all about, I found my dog lying there, bleeding. I looked towards the woods and saw what I believed to be a small figure with very pale skin and a large head. When the creature saw me, it ran into the woods. I went out the next morning and followed the tracks, but they stopped near a creek. In 2008, blogger Alyssa Morrow went to Windsor Road hoping to prove what was real or what was fake. My aunt drove, her friend Megan, my brothers, and their friends came along. We got lost in the area of Mitchell's Mill and Windsor, but we kept seeing shadows in the woods, and when we came to a black gate in the woods in Windsor Road, we all had that gut feeling. That kind of feeling that tells you aren't about to be in a good situation, Morrow wrote. Well, my brother and their friend thought it would be cool to make them not seem like sissies to get out of the car. Well, they walked down a little side road for a few moments, and my aunt and I got scared, so we beeped the horn several times, and they ran back to the car, all diving in. They claimed that there was something that ran across the road. It suddenly got extremely foggy outside. Momentarily, my brother Keith realized he had lost his phone while running back to the car. We were in no mood, and none of us had the courage to turn back. Alex grew up in Kirtland and was dating a girl from Chardon. They often found themselves driving many of the secluded roads, rumored to be in Melonhead territory, looking for a place to park. I know all this sounds manufactured and sensational. As I was growing up, even I brushed the story off as nothing more than a legend, he blogged in 2009. In fact, I used to get mad at people who would spread such ridiculous stories. That all changed in July 1995, when Alex was 18. While traveling down Chardon-Windsor Road, I came face to face with one of the beasts, and I can tell you, they are as real gets, he wrote. Alex said nature called and he needed to get out of the car. Suddenly, I heard my car start up and lurch in the gear, and suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, it moved backwards as the headlights came on, he wrote. The headlights were pointed into the woods, and through the foliage I saw the silhouette of 3 or 4 shadowy shapes lumbering around. One was already on the edge of the road, moving through the bushes and tall grass towards me. From what I could make out, it was no taller than 3 feet and had the biggest, brightest, most bulbous head I've ever seen. One was already on the edge of the road, moving through the bushes and tall grass towards me. From what I could make out, it was no taller than 3 feet and had the biggest, most bulbous head I've ever seen, he said. It wasn't really running, per se, as the equilibrium caused by its disproportion only allowed it to move at a limited speed. I couldn't really get a good look at the thing through the darkness and thick underbrush, but in a split second I had realized the very childhood story I'd heard about in these woods may just be true. I really feared that if I didn't act fast I would be attacked. he concluded. Since that time, I have never laughed when I hear stories of the Melonheads. I don't brush them off, and I never make fun of others who are scared of them. Heed my word as a warning. Don't mess around in the woods around Chardon or Kirtland, or near the Chargan River, unless you want to come face to face with the hideous Melonheads, or theirs might be the last face you will ever see. Melonheads are one of the more forgotten cryptids in American culture, when compared to the likes of Mothman or gray aliens. With that, I hope you learned something new about an often forgotten cryptid, and whether or not you think they're real or not is up to you.